Welcome, everyone, to our Deep Dive audio podcast. I'm David Meyer.
And I'm Laura Wagner.
Today, we're going to visit a website of a blog that I follow named German Heritage USA.
Sounds fun.
You can find this website with this particular blog article that we just reviewed at GermanHeritageUSA.com. Always remember that any news or review that we talk about on our Deep Dive audio podcast will have the link of the article posted in the description box down below.
Cool article about cornhole. You know that game you play at backyard cookouts or tailgating parties?
Yes, I do.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. The article is titled, Let's Play Cornhole, an interesting history that traces back to German immigrants in Cincinnati.
Ever get curious about, just the history behind everyday things?
Yeah.
You know, how'd this whole, cornhole craze even start?
Right.
Well, you're not alone.
Okay.
That's what we're doing today. We're taking a deep dive into the surprisingly murky past of everyone's favorite backyard game.
Yeah, you brought a fascinating collection of articles about cornhole's history. And the main takeaway I'm seeing is that everyone plays it, but no one seems to know for sure where it came from.
Right. And going into this, I was like, okay, I'm going to find out, the person...
Yeah.
Who's it? Maybe there was a patent. Maybe it was a founding father with a really competitive streak.
Right.
And I'm looking at this and it's like, oh, there's all these weird stories.
Yeah.
About a farmer named Jebediah and whispers of Civil War soldier.
Those are definitely some of the more colorful theories that you came across. But as much as we love a good legend,
right,
the research really leans heavily towards speculation over hard facts when it comes to cornhole's very earliest days.
So what about that story about Matthias Cooperman?
Yeah.
He was that German cabinet maker. And I feel several articles kind of mentioned him as a possible inventor.
They do, yeah. And it's a very intriguing tale. This 14th century craftsman, he supposedly created the game to keep children entertained and occupied and away from a much more dangerous game that involved throwing rocks.
Oh, no.
It's the kind of, origin story that kind of gets passed down through generations.
Right.
But when you look for concrete evidence...
It's about as easy to find as that missing sock in the dryer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And honestly, that lack of solid evidence, it's kind of a recurring theme in a lot of these early cornhole theories.
Yeah. Like Jebediah McGillicuddy. He, pops up in nearly every article as potential inventor. But his location, even the time period he lived in, seems to change.
Right.
It's very loose with the facts.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're officially putting those myths to rest.
Okay.
But if it wasn't a farmer or a worried cabinet maker,
right,
what about those mentions of Native American connections?
Right.
Was there a similar game?
There's definitely a possibility. Several articles do point to Native American traditions of games that involve tossing objects into targets.
Right.
It's not a far leap to imagine that evolving into something like cornhole, but the evidence for a direct link is still pretty thin. What I thought was more interesting and honestly a bit surprising is the potential role of schools and recreation programs in shaping cornhole.
Wait, schools?
Yeah.
That, I have to admit, that was not the first place that came to mind.
Right.
When I thought about the history of cornhole.
I know.
It seemed a little too wholesome.
Right. It's true. But starting in the late 1800s and into the early 1900s, you start seeing documented evidence of what they were calling beanbag games.
Okay.
Popping up in schoolyards and summer programs.
Interesting.
Yeah. And in fact, one of the articles you shared even quoted a University of Wisconsin professor who argues that these institutions played a key role in spreading the game's popularity.
Yeah, so instead of chucking rocks at groundhog holes or whatever they were doing back then.
Right. Exactly.
Kids were tossing beanbags during recess.
Yeah, well, I mean, they probably did both.
Yeah, probably, right.
Hopefully not at the same time.
So why were schools so into beanbag games?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And the articles do offer a few compelling possibilities.
Okay.
Some suggest it was seen as a safer alternative to games like baseball or tag, especially in crowded schoolyards.
Makes sense, yeah.
Others speculate that it was valued for its simplicity. It's, easy to learn, it's inexpensive to set up,
right,
and it's adaptable for different ages and skill levels.
Right.
And of course, there's the social aspect.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Beanbag games, much like cornhole today, probably encouraged teamwork, friendly competition, and just plain old fun.
That makes total sense. So we're picturing these like turn-of-the-century schoolyards with kids tossing beanbags.
Right.
Did these early games actually resemble modern cornhole?
Yeah.
Or was it still like evolving at that point?
That's where the details get a bit fuzzy.
Okay.
While these early accounts do mention boards with holes and aiming for targets,
Right.
the exact materials, the scoring systems, even like what they filled those bags with, is all kind of open to interpretation.
Right.
And this takes us to another fascinating and surprisingly contentious aspect of cornhole history, the name itself.
Oh, yeah, the cornhole conundrum. I will admit that and doing research for this, I was like, why is it called that?
Right.
Plus, I learned people in Chicago often just call it bags.
Right.
I'm like, is cornhole having an identity crisis right now?
Maybe a little bit. While the name likely comes from the early use of like dried corn kernels as filler,
Right.
some people do find it a bit, shall we say, indelicate.
Right.
And you're right. In some regions, alternative names like beanbag toss or just bags are more common.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, cornhole stuck.
It did, yeah.
And now it's this iconic term that instantly conjures up, images of backyard barbecues and friendly rivalries.
It's amazing how a simple game can spark, like, debate.
I know, right?
Okay, so we've tackled some myths. We explored the surprisingly wholesome world of schoolyard beanbag games and even dipped our toes into a bit of a naming controversy.
Right.
But if these early games were mostly confined to schoolyards, how did cornhole make the leap to, like, the backyard barbecue staple we know and love today?
That's where a particular region of the U.S. comes into play.
Yeah.
The area around Cincinnati, Ohio,
Okay.
with its strong German heritage, emerges as a kind of pivotal player in cornhole's rise to, fame.
Cincinnati, huh?
Yeah.
So are we going back to that cabinet maker story, or is there, like, more to this German connection?
Well, the cabinet maker theory is still more legend than fact.
Right.
But Cincinnati does have, like, deep German roots.
Yeah.
Remember that huge wave of German immigration to the U.S. in the 1800s?
Yeah, right.
Many of them settled in the Midwest, especially around Cincinnati.
Okay.
And it's very possible they brought, their own folk games with them.
Right.
And some speculate that one of those games might have been a precursor to cornhole.
So instead of a direct line from, like, one inventor, maybe cornhole evolved from kind of like a blend of traditions and games, kind of like a cultural melting pot.
Exactly. And as Cincinnati grew, so did the popularity of this corn toss game, as some historical accounts called it.
Okay.
By the late 1800s and early 1900s, it was a local favorite, played at picnics, festivals, and even, as those articles you shared pointed out, the schoolyards we talked about.
Okay, that's starting to paint a clearer picture.
Yeah.
But there's still a big jump from, like, 19th century picnics to cornhole becoming this, like, national phenomenon. What changed?
You've hit on a very pivotal point.
Yeah.
How did cornhole go from, like, a regional pastime to a game embraced, coast to coast? Well, according to the research, a lot of it can be traced back to two very American traditions, tailgating and backyard barbecue.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. I can definitely picture it. The grill's fired up, everyone's hanging out, and boom, cornhole tournament erupts in the backyard.
It's the perfect storm of factors.
Yeah.
You have this game that's easy to learn. It doesn't require, a ton of equipment.
Right.
And it naturally encourages, socializing.
Yeah.
Plus, it's a game for all ages.
Right.
Kids can play. Grandparents can play. You can even play with a burger in one hand and a drink in the other.
Don't forget the trash talk. All in good fun, of course.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a competitive spirit that comes out, even in those, like, casual games.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And as cornhole became, more and more ingrained in these casual settings, something interesting happened. People started taking the competition a bit more seriously.
So that's where we get, like, the rise of professional cornhole.
Yeah.
And I will admit, the first time I saw a cornhole tournament on, like, ESPN, I was like, is this a joke?
It does sound a bit surreal, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit.
But the research shows just how much cornhole has, like, blown up in recent years.
Yeah.
Those articles you provided mention organizations like the American Cornhole Association, the ACA.
Right.
The American Cornhole League, the ACL, they've, standardized rules, they created ranking systems, they've
Right.
turned cornhole into like a legitimate sport with, televised tournament sponsorships and, everything.
It's amazing to think that a game with such humble beginnings, shrouded in mystery, possibly brought over by German immigrants, could become this, like, organized, like, sport. It really shows how something as simple as, like, tossing a beanbag can capture the imagination and, like, the competitive spirit of so many people.
It speaks to cornhole's like universal appeal,
Yeah.
but its evolution goes beyond, just organized competition.
Okay.
There's a fascinating parallel to kind of this broader resurgence of what some of your articles called yard games.
Okay, yeah.
We're talking horseshoes, croquet, boss ball.
Right.
These classic games that have been enjoyed for generations,
Right.
but are now experiencing like a revival.
Totally.
Especially among, younger crowds.
Yeah.
That's so true. Maybe it's like a nostalgia thing, or maybe it's just like a reaction to kind of our increasingly digital world. Like there's something really satisfying about like unplugging and kind of engaging in a simple, active game with friends and family.
And cornhole seems to have tapped into that, like, perfectly.
Yeah.
But even with, its modern popularity, there's still that air of mystery surrounding its origins.
After digging into all these articles, I'm kind of charmed by the fact that we still don't know for sure, like, who invented cornhole or exactly where it came from.
Yeah.
It adds a layer of intrigue, don't you think?
I agree. It's a good reminder that history isn't always a straight line of, facts and dates.
Right.
Sometimes it's more like piecing together a puzzle with a few, missing pieces.
Right. And in a way, that makes the story even, richer. It leaves room for speculation, interpretation,
Totally.
even a little friendly debate, just like cornhole itself.
That's a great point.
Ah.
But speaking of debates, we can't forget about the ongoing discussion about the name itself. Cornhole.
Right.
It's catchy, it's memorable, but let's be honest, it's a bit awkward.
Yeah.
Do you think it'll ever be replaced by something more well-refined?
It's an interesting thought experiment. The articles you shared definitely highlighted that discomfort that some people have with the name.
Right.
And there have been attempts to popularize, alternatives like beanbag toss or bags.
Right.
But cornhole has this undeniable staying power.
It really does.
It's, it's deeply ingrained in the culture, especially here in the U.S. And there's something to be said for tradition,
Yeah. Even if it's a little silly.
Exactly.
It's like that saying, it's better to be looked over than overlooked.
Right, exactly.
Cornhole might raise a few eyebrows, but it definitely gets people talking.
It does.
But seriously, all jokes aside, it's amazing to think about the journey this game has taken.
Yeah.
From those hazy origins, possibly brought over by German immigrants, to those schoolyards where it found a foothold, to becoming this, like, national pastime, complete with professional leagues and televised tournaments. It's quite a story.
It is. And it speaks to something, larger than just cornhole itself.
Right.
We've seen this, resurgence of interest in simple social games, a desire to kind of unplug and connect with others in a more, hands-on way.
Right.
And cornhole embodies that, like, perfectly. It's accessible, it's fun, it brings people together, regardless of, age, background, skill level.
And at the end of the day, isn't that what really matters?
Exactly.
Whether you're like a seasoned cornhole pro or you're just like tossing a few bags for fun with friends, the game has this incredible ability to create memories, spark laughter, and maybe even ignite a little friendly competition. And honestly, after like diving deep into its history, I think that makes cornhole even more special. It's a reminder that sometimes the simplest things in life are the most enduring and rewarding.
Beautifully put. I think that's a perfect takeaway for our listeners today.
So there you have it, Deep Divers, the surprisingly complex, often hilarious, and ultimately heartwarming story of cornhole. We may never know all the answers, but one thing is for sure, this game has earned its place in the backyard, on the tailgate, and even on the world stage. Until next time, keep those bags flying and the good times rolling.